I'm going to start with the preamble so that you've heard it before, but it's kind of like the Miranda rights, but different. So I want to welcome you to the book fair. This is the 34th edition of the Miami Book Fair. You're in the friendly confines of Miami-Dade College, and we're glad you're here. Are there friends of the book fair in the room? Let's give them a round of applause. You should become a friend of the book fair. The book fair would love you, so please join us and be a friend. It's always pathetic when you ask people to be your friend, but we really need your help. The book fair is an amazing thing that the college does. It's one of the largest gatherings of authors on the planet, and it's a great reason to be here. My name is Patrick. I work here at Miami-Dade College. I won't tell you my last name in case you need to complain about my presentation. So let's see. I need to thank our corporate sponsors, the Knight Foundation, OHL, the Batchelor Foundation, and the DeGroup Foundation. There are these four major corporations that are really backing us this year and making all of this possible. And basically, we will have the author present, and then there'll be some time for Q&A. And then he will go downstairs to the red autographing station, which is down the escalator to your left. His books will be for sale there, and you can have him sign your book following the presentation. So what else? What else do I forget? Cell phones, red autographing station. I think that's about it. Okay, I'm right on time. So we were going to be hearing from Jeffrey Eugenides. He was born in Detroit and attended Brown and Stanford universities. His first novel, The Virgin Suicides, was published in 1993 to great acclaim. In 2003, he received the Pulitzer Prize for his novel Middlesex, which was also a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award. He's won a number of awards. His novel, The Marriage Plot, was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award, and it won the Prix Fitzgerald and the Madame Figaro Literary Prize. Eugenides is a professor at Princeton, where he teaches creative writing, and he's going to talk about and read from his book of short stories, Fresh Complaint. And I'll have him describe what the book is about, and I'll get off stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you all for coming. It's nice to be here at the Miami Book Fair and at Miami-Dade College. I was here a number of years ago. I remember because I was hungover when I had to do my talk last time. And for some reason, the photo that appears on my Wikipedia page was taken shortly after that or during that performance. And you can tell that I look hungover, and there's a lot of reasons not to look at your Wikipedia page, but that's one of them. So whenever I see it, I think of that moment. In the last 10 years, I stopped drinking, so I can at least tell you that I'm not hungover now. So you're getting the actual me, for better or worse. I'm going to talk about my short story collection, Fresh Complaint. It is a book of short stories. It's all the short stories that I've written in my life, comprising the first story that I wrote when I was in graduate school. It's about 27 years old, called Capricious Gardens, and it goes through every now and then I would write a story when I was stuck on a novel and in a mood of despair, thinking that I could never finish anything. Sometimes I would stop and write a story, and little by little I had enough for a book. And then in the last couple of years, I really turned my attention to short stories, and I wrote about a third of the book is new material from 2017. And those stories tend to be a little bit longer. One is 30 pages, one is 50 pages. Because it's a book of short stories, there's no real sense in telling you what it's about. Each story is different. They tend to have different styles, different moods. There seems to be a preoccupation with economic distress, money problems. A lot of the characters have money problems. They're either artists who are struggling or businessmen who have lost their money and are trying to get it back. A lot of this material is close to my experience, close to my heart. So I didn't really know that it was a theme. I don't think of not having money as a theme, but I'm told that your book has a theme of money. And I think, well, yes, life seems to have that theme. Worries about money. So that's what a lot of the story is about. What I'm going to read tonight, though, today, is not about that. It's a story called Complainers. And I wonder if any of you have ever read the book Two Old Women by Velma Wallace. Has anyone read that book? She's an Alaskan writer, and she's an Inuit. And she grew up hearing a legend in her tribe, and she wrote a book about it called Two Old Women. And then they have a tagline on the book. I think it's called A Story of Courage, Betrayal, and Survival. And my mother, it turned out that this was one of my mother's favorite books, and I came across it. My mother died last spring, and she was healthy most of her life, but she had dementia in the last few years. And as many writers my age do, I was thinking a lot about that and wanted to write about her life, but I didn't want to write a typical story about an adult child facing a parent's mental fragility. I'd seen a lot of stories like that, so I thought I would write a story about my mother, but about the thing I knew least well in her life, the part that she lived outside of the home, the part that had nothing to do with me, nothing to do with my father, or as little as possible. And I got to thinking about it. My mother had this friendship with a younger woman, about 20, 25 years younger, that they maintained throughout their lives, even though they lived in different places, moved in different places. And they maintained it largely through reading books. My mother was a great reader, and they would send each other books or read the same books at the same time and talk about them and write letters. And they remained unusual and amazing friends. So I tried to write a story about it, and I used this story, Two Old Women, which was one of their favorite books, as a way of organizing the material. Now the book, just to give you a little idea of what it is about, the legend, it's about this tribe in the Yukon in a time of famine. They're starving, and the elders get together and they decide, we have to go over the mountains because the grandfathers have told us that there's food over the mountains. So they decide to go over the mountains, but they leave two old women behind because the two old women are too slow and old to go, and also they complain too much, the two old women, about their aches and pains. So the women get abandoned in the woods, and they wander around expecting to die. And they run into each other, and they get to talking, and they decide, I don't really feel like dying right now, so what should we do? And they decide to learn all the things they knew as girls, how to hunt again, how to ice fish, where to pick berries. And they go through a number of adventures. Cannibals appear, and they have to hide from them. And finally, after a long time, the tribe comes back over the mountains again, still starving. They haven't found any food at all, and the two old women teach them how to survive in the wilderness. And the book ends, with the moral. From that time on, the tribe never left its elderly behind. So you can see why my mother, who was getting on in years, would comically identify with this book, and so did her friend. And I guess they'd read it a number of times, and it was interesting to me because, one of them lived in suburban Detroit, and my mother lived at that time at rural New Hampshire, and yet they imagined themselves in some way in the same plight as these women. The elders, these grumpy elders, probably were their husbands, and not the tribal elders, and things like that. So it just opened a window in my mother's life that I had never seen before, and that's the basis of the story. I'm not going to read too terribly long, and then I'll be happy to answer questions about anything writing related or my work related. Okay, this is Complainers. Coming up the drive in the rental car, Kathy sees the sign and has to laugh. Wyndham Falls, gracious retirement living. Not exactly how Della has described it. The building comes into view next. The main entrance looks nice enough. It's big and glassy with white benches outside and an air of medical orderliness. But the garden apartments set back on the property are small and shabby, tiny porches like animal pens. The sense outside the curtained windows and weather-beaten doors of lonely lives within. When she gets out of the car, the air feels 10 degrees warmer than it did outside that morning in Detroit. The January sky is a nearly cloudless blue. No sign of the blizzard Clark's been warning her about, trying to persuade her to stay home and take care of him. "Why don't you go next week?" he said. "She'll keep." Kathy's halfway up the front entrance when she remembers Della's present and doubles back to the car to get it. Taking it out of her suitcase, she's pleased once again by her gift-wrapping job. The paper is a thick, pulpy, unbleached kind that counterfeits birch bark. She had to go to 3 different stationery stores to find one she liked. Instead of sticking on a gaudy bow, Kathy clipped sprigs from her Christmas tree, which they were just about to put at the curb, and fashioned a garland. Now the present looks handmade and organic, like an offering in a Native American ceremony, something given not to a person, but to the earth. What's inside is completely unoriginal. It's what Kathy always gives Della, a book. But it's more than that this time, a kind of medicine. Ever since moving down to Connecticut, Della has complained that she can't read anymore. "I just don't seem to be able to stick with a book lately," is how she puts it on the phone. She doesn't say why. They both know why. One afternoon last August, during Kathy's yearly visit to Kentucky, where Della was still living at the time, Della mentioned that her doctor had been sending her for tests. It was just after 5, the sun falling behind the pine trees, to get away from the paint fumes. They were having their margaritas on the screened-in porch. "What kind of tests?" "All kinds of stupid tests," Della said, making a face. "For instance, this therapist she's been sending me to. She calls herself a therapist, but she doesn't look more than 25. She'll make me draw hands on clocks, like I'm back in kindergarten. Or she'll show me a bunch of pictures and tell me to remember them. But then she'll start talking about other things, see, trying to distract me. Then later on she'll ask me what was in the pictures." Kathy looked at Della's face in the shadowy light. At 88, Della is still a lively, pretty woman, her white hair cut in a simple style that reminds Kathy of a powdered wig. She talks to herself sometimes or stares into space, but no more than anyone who spends so much time alone. "How'd you do?" "Not too swell." The day before, driving back from the hardware store in nearby Concord, Della had fretted about the shade of paint they chose. Was it bright enough? Maybe they should take it back. It didn't look as cheerful as it had on the paint sample in the store. Oh, what a waste of money. Finally, Kathy said, "Della, you're getting anxious again." That was all it took. Della's expression eased as if sprinkled with fairy dust. "I know I am," she said. "You have to tell me when I get like that." On the porch, Kathy sipped her drink and said, "I wouldn't worry about it, Della. Tests like that would make anybody nervous." A few days later, Kathy went back to Detroit. She didn't hear any more about the tests. Then, in September, Della called to say that Dr. Sutton had arranged a house call and had asked Bennett, Della's oldest son, to be in attendance. "If she wants Bennett to drive on up here," Della said, "it's probably bad news." The day of the meeting, a Monday, Kathy waited for Della to call. When she finally did, her voice sounded excited, almost giddy. Kathy assumed the doctor had granted her a clean bill of health. But Della didn't mention the test results. Instead, in a mood of almost delirious happiness, she said, "Dr. Sutton couldn't get over how cute we've got my house looking. I told her what a wreck it was when I moved in and how you and I have a project every time you visit, and she couldn't believe it. She thought it was just darling." Maybe Della couldn't face the news, or had already forgotten it. Either way, Kathy felt afraid for her. It was left for Bennett to get on the line and tell her the medical details. These he delivered in a dry, matter-of-fact tone. Bennett works for an insurance company in Hartford, calculating the probabilities of illness and death on a daily basis, and this was maybe the reason. The doctor says my mom can't drive anymore or use the stove. She's going to put her on some medication supposed to stabilize her for a while, but basically the upshot is she can't live on her own. I was just there last month, and your mom seemed fine, Kathy said. She just gets anxious, that's all. There was a pause before Bennett said, yeah, well, anxiety's part of the whole deal. What could Kathy do from her position? She was not only out in the Midwest, but a kind of oddity or interloper in Della's life. Kathy and Della have known each other for over 40 years. They met when they both worked at the College of Nursing. Kathy was 30 at the time, recently divorced. She'd moved back in with her parents so that her mother could look after Mike and John while she was at work. Della was in her 50s, a suburban mother who lived in a fancy house near the lake. She'd gone back to work not because she was desperate for money, like Kathy, but because she had nothing to do. Her 2 oldest boys had already left home. The youngest, Robbie, was in high school. Normally, they wouldn't have come in contact at the college. Kathy worked downstairs in the bursar's office while Della was executive secretary to the dean. But one day in the cafeteria, Kathy overheard Della talking about Weight Watchers, raving about how easy the program was to stick to, how you didn't have to starve. Kathy had just begun to date again. Another way of putting it was she was sleeping around. In the wake of her divorce, she'd been seized by a desperation to make up for lost time. She was as reckless as a teenager, doing it with men she barely knew, in back seats of cars or on the floors of carpeted vans while parked on city streets outside houses where good Christian families lay peacefully sleeping. In addition to the sporadic pleasure she took from these men, Kathy was seeking some kind of self-correction, as if the men's butting and thrusting might knock some sense into her, enough to keep her from marrying anyone like her ex-husband ever again. Coming home after midnight from one of these encounters, Kathy took a shower. After getting out, she stood before the bathroom mirror, appraising herself with the same objective eye she later brought to renovating houses. What could be fixed? What camouflaged? What did she have to live with and ignore? She started going to Weight Watchers with Della. Della drove her to the meetings. Small and pert with frosted hair and large glasses with translucent pinkish frames and a shiny rayon blouse, Della sat on a pillow to see over the wheel of her Cadillac. She wore corny pins in the shape of bumblebees or dachshunds and drenched herself in perfume. It was some department store brand, floral and cloying, engineered to mask a woman's natural smell rather than accentuate it, like the body oils Kathy dabbed on her pressure points. She pictured Della spritzing perfume from an atomizer and then prancing around in the mist. After they'd both lost a few pounds, they splurged once a week on drinks and dinner. Della brought her calorie counter in her purse to make sure they didn't go too wild. That was how they discovered margaritas. Hey, you know what? You know what's low-cal, Della said? Tequila. Only 85 calories an ounce. They tried not to think about the sugar in the mix. Della was only 5 years younger than Kathy's mother. They shared many opinions about sex and marriage, but it was easier to listen to these outdated edicts coming from the mouth of someone who didn't presume ownership over your body. Also, the ways Della differed from Kathy's mom made it clear that her mother wasn't the moral arbiter she'd always been in Kathy's head, but just a personality. It turned out that Kathy and Della had a lot in common. They both liked crafts, decoupage, basket weaving, antiquing, whatever. And they loved to read. They lent library books to each other and after a while took out the same book so that they could read it and discuss it simultaneously. They didn't consider themselves intellectuals, but they knew good writing from bad. Most of all, they liked a good story. They remembered the plots of books more often than their titles or authors. Kathy avoided going to Della's house in Grosse Pointe. She didn't want to subject herself to the shag carpeting or the pastel drapes, or run into Della's Republican husband. She never invited Della over to her parents' house either. It was better if they met on neutral ground where no one could remind them of their incongruity. One night, 2 years after they met, Kathy took Della to a party some women friends were having. One of them had attended a talk by Krishnamurti, and everyone sat on the floor on throw pillows listening to her report. A joint started going around. Uh-oh, Kathy thought when it reached Della. But to her surprise, Della inhaled and passed the joint on. "Well, if that doesn't beat all," Della said afterward. "Now you got me smoking pot." "Sorry," Kathy said, laughing, "but did you get a buzz?" "No, I did not. And I'm glad I didn't. If Dick knew I was smoking marijuana, he'd hit the roof." She was smiling, though, happy to have a secret. They had others. A few years after Kathy married Clark, she got fed up and moved out, checked into a motel on 8 Mile. "If Clark calls, don't tell him where I am," she told Della. And Della didn't. She just brought Kathy food and every night for a week and listened to her rail until she got it out of her system. Enough, at least, to reconcile. "A present? For me?" Della, still full of girlish excitement, gazes wide-eyed at the package Kathy holds out to her. She is sitting in a blue armchair by the window, the only chair, in fact, in the small, cluttered studio apartment. Kathy is perched awkwardly on the nearby daybed. The room is dim because the Venetian blinds are down. "It's a surprise," Kathy says, forcing a smile. She'd been under the impression from Bennett that Wyndham Falls was an assisted living facility. The website makes mention of emergency services and visiting angels. But from the brochure Kathy picked up in the lobby on her way in, she sees that Wyndham advertises itself as a 55-plus retirement community. In addition to the many elderly tenants who negotiate the corridors behind aluminum walkers, there are younger war veterans with beards, vests, and caps scooting around in electric wheelchairs. There's no nursing staff. It's cheaper than assisted living, and the benefits are minimal. Prepared meals in the dining room, linen service once a week, that's it. As for Della, she appears unchanged from the last time Kathy saw her, in August. In preparation for the visit, she has put on a clean denim jumper and a yellow top, and applied lipstick and makeup in the right places and amounts. The only difference is that Della uses a walker herself now. A week after she moved in, she slipped and hit her head on the pavement outside the entrance, knocked out cold. When she came to, a big, handsome paramedic with blue eyes was staring down at her. Della gazed up at him and asked, "Did I die and go to heaven?" At the hospital, they gave Della an MRI to check for bleeding in the brain. Then a young doctor came in to examine her other injuries. "So there I am," Della told Kathy over the phone, 88 years old, and this young doctor is checking over every inch of me, and I mean every inch. I told him, I don't know how much they're paying you, but it isn't enough. These displays of humor confirm what Kathy has felt all along, that a lot of Della's mental confusion is emotional in origin. Doctors love to hand out diagnoses and pills without paying attention to the human person right in front of them. As for Della, she has never named her diagnosis. Instead, she calls it my malady, or this thing I've got. One time she said, "I can never remember the name for what it is I have. It's that thing you get when you're old. That thing you most don't want to have. That's what I've got." Another time she said, "It's not Alzheimer's, but the next one down." Kathy isn't surprised that Della represses the terminology. Dementia isn't a nice word. It sounds violent, invasive, like having a demon scooping out pieces of your brain, which, in fact, is just what it is. Now she looks at Della's walker in the corner, a hideous magenta contraption with a black leatherette seat. Boxes protrude from under the daybed. There are dishes piled in the sink of the tiny efficiency kitchen. Nothing drastic, but Della has always kept the tidiest of houses, and the disarray is troubling. Kathy's glad she brought the present. "Aren't you going to open it?" she asks. Della looks down at the gift as though it has just materialized in her hands. "Oh, right." She turns the package over, examines its underside. Her smile is uncertain. It's as though she knows that smiling is required at this moment, but isn't sure why. "Look at this gift wrapping," she says finally. "It's just precious. I'm going to be careful not to tear it. Maybe I can reuse it." "You can tear it. I don't mind." No, Della insists. "I want to save this nice paper." Her old spotted hands work at the wrapping paper until it comes unstuck. The book falls into her lap. No recognition. That doesn't mean anything necessarily. The publishers have put out a new edition. The original cover, with the illustration of the two women sitting cross-legged in a wigwam, has been replaced by a color photograph of snow-capped mountains and jazzier type. A second later, Della exclaims, "Oh, hey, our favorite." "Not only that," Kathy says, pointing at the cover, "look, 20th anniversary edition, 2 million sold. Can you believe it?" "Well, we always knew it was a good book." "We sure did. People should listen to us." In a softer voice, Kathy says, "I thought it might get you back to reading, Della, since you know it so well." "Hey, right. So to prime the pump. That last book you sent me, that Room, I've been reading that for 2 months now and haven't gotten further than 20 pages. That book's a little intense. It's all about someone stuck in a room. Hits a little close to home." Kathy laughs, but Della isn't entirely joking, and this gives Kathy an opportunity. Sliding off the daybed, she gesticulates at the walls, groaning, "Couldn't Bennett and Robbie get you a better place than this?" "They probably could," Della says, "but they say they can't. Robbie's got alimony and child support, and as far as Bennett goes, that Joanne probably doesn't want him spending any money on me. She never liked me." Kathy sticks her head in the bathroom. It's not as bad as she expects, nothing dirty or embarrassing. But the rubberized shower curtain looks like something in an asylum. That's something they can fix right away. "I've got an idea." Kathy turns back to Della. "Did you bring your family photos?" "I sure did. I told Bennett I wasn't going anywhere without my photo albums. As it is, he made me leave all my good furniture behind, so the house will sell. But you know what? So far, not a single person has even come through." If Kathy is listening, she doesn't show it. She goes to the window and yanks up the blinds. "We can start by brightening things up here a little. Get some pictures on the walls. Make this place look like somewhere you live. That would be good. If this place wasn't so pitiful looking, I think I might feel better about being here. It's almost like being incarcerated." Della shakes her head. "Some of the people in this place are sort of on the edge, too." "They're edgy, huh?" "Real edgy," Della says, laughing. "You have to be careful who you sit next to at lunch." Thank you. I've just demonstrated what Marco Rubio and the president should do when they. You see that? Doesn't look as bad. Glasses are better. They should have water in glasses because you don't look as ridiculous. But yes, brave early questioner, wonderful.
Thank you. Great reading, great work. In Middlesex,
Yes.
you have these horrendous scenes of destruction of the, I can't remember the name of the city.
Smyrna.
Smyrna.
Yeah,
right,
Smyrna.
right,
Now
right.
Izmir, but Smyrna in those days.
Yes.
Yeah.
Where did you get that?
Well, history gave it to me. My grandparents were Greeks who lived in Asia Minor and escaped, I'm not sure when, but many Greeks had to get out during the Greco-Turkish War in 1922. So what happened was the Greeks invaded. Part of Asia Minor had been in Greek hands since ancient times. So there's a feeling that it was still Greece in the minds of the Greeks, and they invaded with the help of the Allies and reclaimed a great portion of it. Then the Turks, under the leadership of Ataturk, fought back and won, and the Greek population, who had been living there in relative tranquility, had to get out because they were going to be killed. So they fled. A lot of them ended up in Smyrna, as did Armenians and a lot of people who were in peril at the time. And there's historical debate about what happened, but most probably the city was set fire to by the Turkish troops, and there was a real problem of trying to get on boats and get out. So it's a historical atrocity, tragedy, and I used it in my novel because I was writing about the war, and it's perhaps the one event that encapsulates everything that was going on. And because the book then proceeds to tell the story of my hometown, Detroit, and the civil unrest and conflagration of the city that happened in '67, it's a kind of way of prefiguring later events in the book. So the book's about immigration and bringing identities into a new place where things necessarily repeat themselves because of racial and national conflicts. So that's how I got it. I didn't know a lot about it when I started writing the book. I had to do research, and I hadn't ever written a book that required research. I thought I could just do it on my own through the boldness of my imagination, but I quickly realized that I needed a little support. So I began reading some books, and there wasn't a lot on Smyrna in 1922, but I did find a wonderful book by a woman named Marie Housepian Dobkin, Armenian descent, and I got a lot of the information from that book.
Another question? I'll take this one and then back to you. You'll be number two.
I happen to be first. First of all, thank you for your books. I've read them all, and they have been great company for me.
Thank you.
All of them, and your anthology, I love short stories as well. The story you just read, I think, is a masterpiece. Complainers, it's amazing. I think it's going to stay for years. It's very different to the rest of the work, and you feel
Very different?
well.
Yeah, it is.
You feel some individuality in the story. It's like it's not related to the rest, and I think well, my question is a bit in that line. You see how the short stories, some of them talk to your bigger work or to your novels. Mm-hmm. You see the origin of Middlesex is clearly there, and you also see the marriage plot somehow. So I wonder if you're working on something whose origin is here.
Oh, well, Complainers is a story that I had a lot of difficulty writing and felt conflicted about for a long time, not only because it was addressing a difficult part of my life, my mother's death. I kept writing it for a couple of years, I think in an attempt to keep her intact in my mind and to keep her alive in a sense, and I finished it only shortly after she died. So emotionally, it was difficult, but in terms of my literary sense, I was trying to write a story that it's a very quiet story, and I haven't written quiet fiction. Most of my fiction comes on more like gangbusters, and the style is, it has a lot of energy in it. At least I hope that it does, and there's a lot of wordplay and comedy and things like that. But I was trying to cut down on that and see that if I restrained myself, could I access a different level of psychology and dramatic tension. But I was worried about it becoming boring or dull, because I had the story of, an old folks' home and these two women, and it's not exactly like it's not exactly like a mafia story where you have a lot of action. So I was a little bit worried about it, and it kind of goes against my personality, which tends not to be that restrained. So it prefigures what I've been trying to do, or what I will do in my next novels, and I'm trying to deepen that aspect of my work, characterization and psychology, not at the expense of style, but in concord with a harmony between style and subject. I've got to a point where I just got a little bit fatigued with the sitcom aspect of a lot of contemporary American writing, where you're constantly going for a joke, or you're just so worried you're going to lose someone's attention right away. I was trying to brave it out, tough it out, and write something that was sustained and built slowly. So when I finished it, I wasn't sure. The first time I read it out loud, I thought, this is actually just as dull and boring as I thought. And then some people liked it, so I got braver about it. And then I thought, well, it at least is what I tried to make it be. So now I've been reading it on tour, and I guess feeling my mother's presence a little bit makes me do it. So I think you'll see aspects of this, not in terms of the subject matter. I don't probably, well, who's to say? My mother probably will appear in other things I write, but you'll see a movement of my work toward what I hope would be a depth and not a surface excitement in what I'm working on now. There's still humor in my work. I wouldn't want to be unfunny. I don't like people who don't make jokes. I don't want my books not to make jokes, but I don't want them just to make jokes. So I've been concentrating on that, trying to get a little bit more serious as I get older. Yeah. Hi. Oh, that's a filming person. Okay.
Someone with a question? No?
Someone
Okay.
had a phone.
Someone else? Right there.
Yeah.
The microphone's coming your way.
I'm sorry?
Well, the virgin suicides,
Mm-hmm.
there were no jokes. Did I miss something?
Oh, Virgin Suicides is extremely funny, yes.
Oh.
I hope. I mean, it's a tragic-comic novel. It's full of jokes. Yeah, you missed.
I
mean,
loved
who's to
it,
say?
but-
Maybe it wasn't. I thought it was funny. People tell me it's funny. Yeah, no, it's funny. It's dark. It's dark comedy. It's black humor.
Yeah, maybe
yeah,
it's black humor.
it is. Yeah.
Well, I feel that a lot of the work is what I like to think of as a prophetic aspect to it, but perhaps because of what you just said, slapstick, it doesn't, seem obvious to everybody else. But I have felt that your work has spoken of things that become important in our culture before they actually do.
Mm-hmm.
And then looking back, I realized you discussed all of these, pretty brilliantly and wove them together in a way that we're still trying to catch up. So I was wondering whether you've thought of just going nonfiction and doing the same exact thing, but
No, yeah. Well,
in your face nonfiction.
I mean, one of the goals of the novelist is try to anticipate where the culture is going. So, to the extent that any of my books have done that, I'd be pleased. I'm pleased to hear that you think that that's the case. Obviously, Middlesex came out in 2002, and it's told by an intersex narrator who's born female and becomes male. And when it came out, there wasn't a lot of talk about that. I had to explain the concept of gender identity, that someone's gender identity could be opposite to their biological sex. And I did experience a fair amount of revulsion to the material at first. People didn't want to read and buy Middlesex when it came out, and it really needed to gather steam, and people needed to think it was somehow safe to read in an odd way. And now, where we are in the culture, these topics don't have to be explained. So things have shifted remarkably quickly in terms of cultural understanding about gender and ambiguous gender at birth. I didn't write the book because I thought, oh, this will be big in the culture and I'm going to get on the train early. I was just interested in it for my own reasons. I think, I grew up in the 70s, came of age in the 70s. There was an idea of unisex behavior in the 70s. There's a lot of bisexuality was trendy when I was in college. The glam rock was big. David Bowie was dressing androgynously. So it was in the culture when I was growing up. When I was trying to figure out how to become a man or be male, I wasn't sure what that meant, and there was an idea of becoming, more the sensitive male was a big back then. It's hard to remember in the days of Harvey Weinstein that sensitive male was big in the 70s. He must not have gotten that memo. When he says he's a dinosaur, he was that age then, so I don't know what he's talking about. So I was thinking about that. Then I did read classical literature that deals a lot with, in literary terms, the idea of the hermaphrodite. So I use that term in the book to designate someone of ambiguous gender in literature. As it relates to people, I use the term intersex. But I was interested in these issues, and for other reasons I won't go into in my own psychology, I was interested in what would it be like if you lived, as the other gender. I think all of us wonder what that would be like. So I wanted to write a novel about it, and it has become much more mainstream idea than when the book came out. But you can't really, you got to look at society, look at yourself, and write what interests you. And hopefully, if you do that accurately, it will be, it will anticipate some movement of where the culture is going. But I don't think you can think of it in those concrete intellectual terms. It's more of an intuition that you have. And sometimes you'll get it right and sometimes you won't.
So we have time for about 2 more questions. Does someone else have a question? One right there. A microphone is coming to you. No,
Yeah,
no.
I can hear you. Can I repeat it too?
Okay.
I was just curious, they said in your introduction that you teach creative writing at Princeton.
Yeah. The question is, I teach at Princeton. How often do I teach? Do you want to see if I'm earning my paycheck? I can tell you I'm definitely not earning my paycheck. I teach a light load. I teach 1 class per semester. So I teach on Tuesday nights, 7:30 to 9:20. You're welcome to drop by. And, I'm a writer, and mainly I'm at home writing, but I teach one night a week. Yeah.
Oh,
When
sorry.
okay.
Mine's not really a question because I wanted to give everybody that had serious questions.
You're the one
the
that's
time.
drinking beer, right?
I know, I
That's
am
good.
drinking beer.
This question could be out of line. I just want to tell everybody.
I just thought in that most of the stories are very male-centered, which I get it because you're a male, so you're the writer. But the one in it was early music when you're describing the guy who's not able to meet the needs financially, and then go on to a whole big paragraph about the poor wife who's trying to make her the mice and warm, and how women, when they try and do a job, it's not really a job, it's like a non-job, and sort of poking fun at women who are overeducated trying to raise kids and being in a house. I got a big kick out of that, reading it aloud to my husband, who immediately said, yes, that's exactly how it looks and how it is. We have to make the money, and you guys get to have a hobby, and
So
then
I
you
caused
call
a little-
yourselves an entrepreneur.
What happened in the end of this fight?
Yeah, exactly. Then I read it to my daughter and my other kids, who all said just please go make dinner already. Go back to your office and read your book. So I thought, it was very funny, and it was very.
Yeah, it's a touchy thing, but in
a touchy thing.
In that story, I mean, the man is also not making any money at his art, right?
Not,
and
but at
he's
the same
doing his
time,
music, and
no.
she's got her business.
But he's a little bit more respected, and because she's trying to do something, it can be
I don't know.
poked fun out
Yeah.
a little bit. And
I
then
mean,
when you said the part about her having scribbled her notes and her finances on the back of an envelope somewhere, that it was quite funny.
Well, I mean, it's something that I certainly have observed. I didn't mean it to be an absolutely widespread description of marriages, but in this marriage, I certainly have a lot of friends where that kind of thing is occurring. But I make so much fun of my poor male characters that I thought I would also make fun of some of the female characters, just to be fair.
So we can continue this. We can continue this downstairs. I need to let's give a round of applause to.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming.